My name is Gloria Winters, 62 years old, and nothing prepares you for the moment your world shatters with a phone call. I was enjoying my quiet life in Minneapolis when a hospital in Florida contacted me about my son Michael. We'd barely spoken in months, but a mother's intuition told me something was terribly wrong. Tiffany, his wife of 2 years, had been isolating him from family, but what I discovered in that ICU room was beyond my worst nightmares. I hope you'll share where you're watching from today in the comments below. If stories of family betrayal and a mother's fight for justice resonate with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more extraordinary true stories. Trust me, what happened next when I discovered Tiffany partying on a yacht while my son fought for his life will leave you speechless. It was a Wednesday morning in October when everything changed. I was following my usual retirement routine. Coffee with the morning paper, a short walk around the neighborhood to enjoy the crisp fall air, then back home to tend to my indoor plants. After losing my husband Jack to a heart attack 15 years ago, I'd built a quiet life for myself in Minneapolis. My small garden apartment was just enough space for me and my cat Jasper, a temperamental orange tabby who barely tolerated my existence except at feeding time. I was just settling in to call my sister when the phone rang, an unfamiliar Florida area code flashing on the screen. "Is this Gloria Winters?" a professional female voice asked. "Yes, this is Gloria," I replied, a strange sense of foreboding washing over me. "Mrs. Winters, I'm calling from Tampa General Hospital. Your son Michael has been admitted to our intensive care unit with severe pneumonia that has progressed to sepsis." The room seemed to tilt. "Michael, how bad is it?" "I'm afraid his condition is critical. We've been trying to reach his wife Tiffany as next of kin for several days without success. One of our nurses found your contact information in his wallet." My heart pounded as I struggled to process this information. Michael, my only child, my brilliant boy, was critically ill, and I was just now finding out, and Tiffany, his wife of barely 2 years, was nowhere to be found. "I'll be on the next flight," I said firmly, already mentally packing my bag. After hanging up, I immediately tried calling Tiffany. The call went straight to voicemail. I sent text messages and emails marked urgent with no response. I even tried calling Michael directly, knowing he wouldn't answer if he was in intensive care, but needing to try anyway. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, memories of Michael flooded back. My sensitive, thoughtful boy who asked questions about everything. The way his eyes lit up when he solved a difficult math problem. How he stayed up all night at age 12 comforting me after Jack died, trying to be the man of the house despite his own grief. I raised him alone after that. We formed a team, the two of us against the world. I worked extra shifts as a nurse to put him through college, and he studied relentlessly, determined to make something of himself. We talked about everything: his classes, his friends, his first serious girlfriend in college. When he graduated with honors in computer engineering, I couldn't have been prouder. Michael started his career in Minneapolis, and for several years we maintained our close relationship. Sunday dinners at my place, holiday traditions, kept alive the occasional movie night where he'd patiently explain the superhero universes to me. Then 3 years ago, he was offered a position with a software company in Tampa, a significant promotion with nearly double the salary. I encouraged him to take it, despite knowing how much I'd miss him. The first year we spoke several times a week by phone. He flew home for Christmas and my birthday. He seemed happy, thriving in the Florida sunshine and excelling at his new job. Then he met Tiffany at a company event. Beautiful, outgoing, 10 years his junior. Their relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months he proposed. By their 8-month anniversary, they were married in a small ceremony in Tampa. I was the only family member invited from Michael's side. I remember feeling uneasy at their wedding. Tiffany was charming, but somehow insubstantial. She gushed over me in public, but maintained a strange distance. The few times I tried to speak with Michael alone, she appeared at his side, her arm linked possessively through his. When I asked about visiting them in Tampa, there were always reasons why the timing wasn't right. Renovations to their condo, heavy workloads, travel plans. Over the past year, our conversations had dwindled. Michael, once so communicative, became vague and evasive. Our weekly calls became monthly, then sporadic. When we did speak, Tiffany was often audible in the background, sometimes interrupting or rushing him off the phone. The last time we had a real conversation was nearly 3 months ago, when Michael mentioned feeling unusually tired all the time. When I suggested he see a doctor, Tiffany's voice cut in from somewhere nearby. "He's fine. Gloria just working too hard." Now, as my neighbor Karen drove me to the airport, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. Had he been sick even then? How could things deteriorate to the point of hospitalization without anyone contacting me? "He'll be okay, Gloria," Karen reassured me, misreading my silence as fear rather than mounting anger. "Michael's young and strong." I nodded, unable to voice the dark suspicion forming in my mind that something was very wrong, not just with Michael's health, but with his marriage. By the time I boarded the flight to Tampa, my hands were shaking, not just with fear for my son, but with determination to uncover the truth. The flight to Tampa felt interminable. Every bump of turbulence, every announcement from the captain stretched my nerves thinner. I tried to sleep, but couldn't stop picturing Michael alone in a hospital bed, wondering why no one had come for him. The sweet elderly woman beside me eventually offered me a tissue, and I realized I'd been silently crying. When we finally landed, a violent thunderstorm was battering Tampa. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, nature's fury matching the storm brewing within me. I grabbed my carry-on bag and was first off the plane, navigating the unfamiliar airport with single-minded focus. Outside, I jumped into a taxi, giving the driver the hospital address I'd scribbled down. "Bad night to be out," the driver commented, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. "You visiting someone at Tampa General?" "My son," I replied tersely, not trusting myself with more words. Tampa General Hospital loomed ahead, its windows glowing against the stormy sky. I paid the driver and rushed inside, disoriented by the bright lights and antiseptic smell that brought back memories of my nursing career. At the information desk, I identified myself with a voice that sounded calmer than I felt. "Michael Winters. I'm his mother. He's in the ICU." After verifying my identity, the receptionist called upstairs, then directed me to the intensive care unit on the 4th floor. The elevator ride was a blur. When the doors opened, I followed signs to the ICU waiting area where a nurse greeted me. "Mrs. Winters, I'm Elaine. Dr. Patel is with a patient, but he'll be out shortly to speak with you. Can I get you anything?" "Water?" I shook my head. "Please, I need to see my son." "Dr. Patel will need to speak with you first. ICU protocol." Her kind eyes reflected sympathy. "It won't be long." 20 agonizing minutes later, a tall man in a white coat approached. "Mrs. Winters, I'm Dr. Patel, the attending physician for your son." We sat in a quiet corner of the waiting area as he explained Michael's condition. What started as pneumonia had progressed to septic shock when left untreated. His body was fighting a massive infection, his organs under severe strain. "Has he been ill long?" I asked. Dr. Patel's expression grew troubled. "Based on the progression of the infection and his overall condition, I would estimate he's been symptomatic for at least 3 to 4 weeks. By the time he was brought to the emergency room, he was barely conscious, with a dangerously high fever." "Who brought him in?" "A co-worker who became concerned when he missed an important meeting. When no one answered the door at your son's home, the co-worker used a spare key Michael had given him for emergencies. He found Michael unresponsive on the bathroom floor." My hands clenched into fists. "And his wife?" Dr. Patel hesitated. "We've been trying to reach Mrs. Winters since admission 3 days ago. She visited briefly the first day but left after less than 30 minutes. She hasn't returned or answered our calls since." "I need to see him. Now, please." Dr. Patel nodded and led me through the double doors into the ICU. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled the air as we passed several rooms before stopping outside one with partially drawn curtains. "Mrs. Winters," Dr. Patel said gently, "your son is intubated and unconscious. We have him on broad-spectrum antibiotics and vasopressors to maintain his blood pressure. Please prepare yourself." Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Michael, my 6-foot-tall son, who had always been solid and strong, looked diminished in the hospital bed. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones protruding sharply against sallow skin. Multiple IV lines snaked from his arms. A ventilator tube obscured much of his face, forcing air into lungs too weak to function on their own. The monitor beside him displayed numbers I understood all too well from my nursing days, none of them reassuring. "Oh, Michael," I whispered, approaching the bed slowly. "What happened to you?" As Dr. Patel stepped out to give me privacy. Nurse Elaine entered to check Michael's vitals. She adjusted something on one of his IV pumps before speaking quietly. "He's severely malnourished and dehydrated. We found his blood sugar was dangerously high when admitted. Undiagnosed type 1 diabetes that's been uncontrolled for months. That's why the infection hit him so hard. His immune system was already compromised." I looked at her sharply. "Diabetes? He never mentioned being diagnosed." "We don't believe he was diagnosed previously, but the blood work suggests it's been developing for some time." She hesitated. "Mrs. Winters, your son has lost a significant amount of weight recently. Would you say that's accurate?" I studied Michael's face, the hollow cheeks, and pronounced jawline that hadn't been there when I last saw him. "The last time I saw him in person was 8 months ago. He was healthy then, maybe 180 pounds. How much does he weigh now?" 132 at admission. Shock coursed through me. Michael had lost nearly 50 pounds, a third of his body weight, and no one had noticed. Or worse, someone had noticed and done nothing. After ensuring no other staff were within earshot, Nurse Elaine spoke even more softly. "I should mention, when his wife did visit, her behavior was concerning. She spent most of the time on her phone, seemed irritated by the doctor's questions, and left when we explained the severity of his condition. She hasn't called to check on him since." My nursing training had taught me to remain professional, but maternal instinct overrode everything else. "Where are his personal belongings?" Elaine brought me a plastic hospital bag containing the items Michael had with him when admitted, his wallet, watch, and phone. I hesitated only briefly before unlocking his phone with the fingerprint sensor against his unconscious hand, a violation of privacy justified by desperate circumstances. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Text exchanges with Tiffany showed her dismissing his complaints of fatigue, weight loss, and constant thirst, all classic diabetes symptoms. "Stop being dramatic," one message read. "It's just stress. Take an aspirin and get to work." Photos in his gallery showed a progressive decline, Michael looking increasingly thin and unwell over months. His financial app revealed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account, often coinciding with days he'd texted about feeling too sick to work. Most damning of all were Tiffany's social media accounts still publicly viewable. While Michael had been fighting for his life in the hospital, she had been posting photos from beaches, restaurants, and clubs, always perfectly styled, not a hint of concern evident. The most recent post, time-stamped just that morning, showed her laughing on a yacht, champagne glass in hand, caption reading, "Living my best life with the best people." I showed the phone to Elaine, my hand shaking with rage. "She knows he's here. She knows he could die." Elaine's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Mrs. Winters, as a mandated reporter, I'm obligated to mention that what we're seeing raises concerns about potential neglect or abuse. I'll need to document this for the patient advocate." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "Document everything, and please call me Gloria. I'm going to need your help." I spent that night in an uncomfortable recliner beside Michael's bed, dozing fitfully between the nurses' checks and the constant beeping of monitors. I spoke to him throughout the night, hoping that somewhere in his unconscious state he could hear me. I told him about Minneapolis, about Jasper the cat, destroying my new houseplant, about anything normal I could think of. I avoided mentioning Tiffany or my growing suspicions. In the gray light of early morning, Dr. Patel found me still at Michael's bedside, my hand resting gently on his arm. "You should get some rest at a hotel," he suggested. "We can call if there's any change." "I'm not leaving him," I replied simply. "How is he doing this morning?" Dr. Patel reviewed the chart and examined Michael thoroughly before answering. "The antibiotics are starting to work against the infection, but his system is very compromised. The diabetes complicated everything." "Winters, I have to be honest. Your son has a roughly 50-50 chance of recovery. The next 48 hours will be critical. What happens if he improves? Best case scenario, we'll gradually wean him off the ventilator, stabilize his diabetes, and begin the process of rehabilitation. But he'll have a long recovery ahead. He'll need significant support. He'll have it, I said firmly. After Dr. Patel left, a woman in a tailored suit knocked gently on the doorframe. Mrs. Winters, I'm Lisa Delgado from Hospital Social Services. Do you have a moment to talk? We stepped into a small consultation room where Lisa explained that Nurse Elaine had filed a report concerning possible neglect. Given your son's condition on arrival and the circumstances surrounding his admission, we're obligated to explore whether there's been a case of medical neglect or abandonment by his spouse. There has been, I said without hesitation, and I believe financial exploitation as well. I showed her the evidence I'd gathered from Michael's phone. The dismissed symptoms, the unexplained withdrawals, the social media posts, proving Tiffany's awareness and indifference to Michael's condition. Mrs. Winters accessing your son's phone raises some privacy concerns, Lisa noted carefully. I understand that, but my son is fighting for his life because someone who was supposed to care for him did nothing while he became critically ill. I had to understand what happened. Lisa nodded slowly. Would you be willing to pursue temporary power of attorney for healthcare decisions while your son is incapacitated, given the circumstances, and with documentation of his wife's absence during critical medical decisions, a judge might grant emergency provisions? Absolutely. And what about protecting him legally and financially? You should consult with an attorney immediately about that aspect. I can provide referrals to legal aid if needed. I shook my head. I have a family lawyer back in Minneapolis. I'll call him now. As soon as Lisa left, I called Robert Feldman, who had handled my husband's estate and had been a trusted advisor for over 20 years. Gloria, slow down, he said after I rapidly explained the situation. This is serious. What you're describing could constitute criminal elder or dependent adult abuse, even though Michael is young. Florida has strict laws about exploitation of vulnerable individuals. What do I do, Robert? She's out partying while he's dying, and from what I can see, she's drained their accounts. First, we need to establish your legal standing to act on Michael's behalf. I can draft an emergency petition for temporary conservatorship based on his incapacity and the evidence of exploitation. We'll need the doctor's documentation of his condition and inability to make decisions. And the accounts, can we stop her from taking more money? With evidence of financial abuse, yes. I can contact their financial institutions with documentation of suspected fraud. Most banks have elder and vulnerable adult protection protocols. They can temporarily freeze accounts pending investigation. Do it, I said firmly. All of it. Over the next several hours, I worked methodically while sitting beside Michael. I forwarded evidence to Robert's signed documents electronically, spoke with the hospital's patient advocate, and began the process of legally protecting my son. Using Michael's phone, which I now felt no hesitation about accessing, I downloaded statements showing the suspicious pattern of withdrawals that had accelerated as his health declined. What emerged was a disturbing picture. Over the past year, nearly $200,000 had disappeared from their joint accounts. Large cash withdrawals, wire transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Luxury purchases from high-end stores. None of it aligned with the Michael I knew, who had always been careful with money. Even more disturbing were emails I discovered between Michael and his employer. He had requested medical leave 3 months ago due to ongoing fatigue and unexplained weight loss. Tiffany, I learned, had been calling his office regularly, assuring them Michael was recovering well and would return soon. Meanwhile, she had accessed his work email and submitted his resignation without his knowledge just 2 weeks ago. By mid-afternoon, I had compiled enough evidence to act decisively. With Robert's guidance, I contacted Michael's bank with documentation of suspected fraud, including medical records proving his incapacity during recent transactions. The bank representative, alarmed by what I shared, immediately implemented their vulnerable adult protection protocol, placing a temporary freeze on all joint accounts pending investigation. I also placed fraud alerts with the major credit bureaus, effectively preventing Tiffany from opening new accounts in Michael's name. Robert filed emergency petitions with the courts for both medical and financial powers of attorney expedited due to the circumstances. When I returned to Michael's room after making these arrangements, I found Dr. Patel and 2 nurses beside his bed, their expressions grave. "What's happened?" I demanded, rushing forward. "His oxygen levels are dropping despite the ventilator," Dr. Patel explained. "The infection has caused fluid to build up around his lungs. We need to perform an emergency procedure to drain it." "What are the risks?" "Given his weakened state, any procedure carries significant risk. But without intervention, his condition will certainly deteriorate further." As his next of kin in the absence of his wife, and with the temporary medical authorization forms I'd signed earlier, the decision fell to me. I signed the consent forms with a steady hand, then watched them wheel my son away to a procedure room, uncertain if I would see him conscious again. In the small hospital chapel, I finally allowed myself to break down. Alone in the dimly lit room, I sobbed for my son, for the pain he must have endured, for the betrayal by someone who had vowed to love him in sickness and in health. I wept until I had no tears left, then sat in silent prayer, bargaining with God, as parents have done since the beginning of time. A gentle hand on my shoulder startled me. It was Nurse Elaine off duty, but still in scrubs. "They're bringing him back now," she said. "The procedure went well. His oxygen levels are already improving." As we walked back to the ICU together, Elaine shared something unexpected. "My brother went through something similar. His wife isolated him, convinced him his health problems were all in his head. By the time our family realized what was happening, he'd lost everything. His health, his savings, his self-worth. It took years for him to recover." "Did he recover completely?" I asked. "Yes, but only because someone intervened, like you're doing now." She squeezed my arm. "You getting on that plane might have saved his life, Gloria." Back in the ICU, Michael looked marginally better. The procedure had relieved some of the pressure on his lungs, and his color seemed slightly improved. Dr. Patel was cautiously optimistic. "The next 24 hours will tell us more," he said, "but this is a positive step." I resumed my vigil beside Michael, speaking to him softly, telling him to fight. Around sunset, his phone, which I had kept charged, began vibrating repeatedly. Tiffany's name flashed on the screen. The account freezes had clearly been discovered. With a deep breath to steady myself, I answered the call. "Michael! Finally! What the hell is going on with our accounts?" Tiffany's voice was shrill with anger. Music and laughter echoed in the background. "This isn't Michael," I replied calmly. "This is Gloria, his mother." A moment of silence, then, "Gloria, why do you have Michael's phone? Where is he?" "He's in the intensive care unit at Tampa General Hospital. He has been for 3 days. But I think you know that, Tiffany." Another pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted dramatically to one of exaggerated concern. "Oh my God, I've been so worried. I've been calling the hospitals looking for him. I just got back from a business trip and found him gone. I'm coming right now." "Don't bother lying, Tiffany. I've seen your social media posts. You've been partying on a yacht while my son fights for his life. I've seen the text messages where he begged you to help him get medical care. You went through his phone. That's invasion of privacy. You have no right." "I have every right. I'm his mother, and as of 2 hours ago, I'm his legal medical proxy and have temporary financial power of attorney. All your access to his accounts has been frozen, pending investigation for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." Her facade cracked instantly. "You can't do that. That's my money too." "Actually, I can, and I did. The banks are already investigating the $200,000 you've siphoned from his accounts while he's been ill. The police will be very interested in those transfers to your secret accounts." "You bitch! You have no idea who you're messing with." Tiffany's voice had transformed completely raw with fury. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Someone who left my son to die alone while she partied with his money. Someone who will now face consequences." I heard her incoherent scream of rage as I ended the call, my hand perfectly steady. Within 30 minutes, Tiffany arrived at the hospital still dressed in party clothes, a short designer dress, expensive jewelry reeking of alcohol. The security guard I'd spoken with earlier intercepted her at the ICU entrance. "Mrs. Winters," he said, deliberately ambiguous about which Mrs. Winters he meant. "I'll need to see ID." Tiffany fumbled with her purse, pulling out a driver's license. The guard examined it, then looked at his clipboard. "I'm sorry you're not on the approved visitor list at this time." "That's ridiculous. I'm his wife." "Hospital policy, ma'am. Only approved visitors in the ICU." Tiffany spotted me through the glass doors and began shouting, "You can't keep me from my husband! That's my right!" The commotion drew attention from the nursing staff. The charge nurse approached her, expression stern. "Ma'am, this is an intensive care unit. I need to ask you to lower your voice immediately. Do you know who I am? I'll sue this entire hospital." As Tiffany's behavior escalated, security was called to escort her from the premises. She continued screaming threats as they led her away, creating a spectacle that ensured everyone on the floor knew exactly who she was and who she wasn't. After she was gone, I met with a detective from the Tampa Financial Crimes Unit who had responded to the bank's fraud report with remarkable speed. Detective Rivera reviewed the evidence I'd compiled, his expression growing grimmer with each document. "Mrs. Winters, what you've provided gives us probable cause to investigate financial exploitation. I'll be straight with you. These cases can be complicated, especially between spouses where there's presumed consent for financial access. But the pattern here, combined with your son's medical incapacitation, strengthens the case considerably." "What happens next?" "We'll subpoena the bank records to follow the money trail interview witnesses, including hospital staff regarding your daughter-in-law's behavior, and determine if criminal charges are warranted." Just as Detective Rivera was leaving, Dr. Patel appeared with cautiously positive news. Michael's latest blood work showed the antibiotics were effectively fighting the infection. His blood sugar levels were stabilizing under careful management. The ventilator settings had been reduced slightly as his breathing improved. "He's not out of danger," Dr. Patel cautioned, "but he's moving in the right direction." That evening I received calls from both the bank investigator and Robert. The bank had found evidence that Tiffany had emptied their safe deposit box just days before Michael's hospitalization, removing valuable jewelry and documents. Robert had successfully secured emergency temporary conservatorship, giving me legal authority to make both medical and financial decisions while Michael remained incapacitated. To my surprise, an older couple arrived at the hospital the following morning, introducing themselves as Edward and Patricia Lawrence, Tiffany's parents. Their initial manner was cold and defensive. "We understand you've made serious accusations against our daughter," Edward began. "Not accusations, facts. Would you like to see them?" I showed them the evidence I'd compiled, the text messages, bank statements, medical records, and social media posts. Their hostility gradually gave way to uncomfortable silence, and then remarkably to shame. "We've been concerned about Tiffany's behavior for some time," Patricia finally admitted. "The spending, the partying, the revolving door of friends. We tried to talk to Michael about it at Christmas, but Tiffany never left us alone with him." "Did you know Michael was ill?" Edward shook his head. "Tiffany told us he was working constantly too busy for family gatherings. We had no idea." Their distress seemed genuine. Before leaving, Patricia pressed something into my hand, a business card for a private investigator. "We hired him last month to look into some concerns we had about property missing from our home. He's discreet and thorough." The PI, James Mercer, responded immediately to my call. When I explained the situation, he agreed to shift his investigation to locate Tiffany's secret apartment, the address I'd found referenced in emails but couldn't pinpoint exactly. Within hours, he called back with news. "Found it. High-end condo in South Tampa leased 6 months ago under her maiden name. Been conducting surveillance for 2 hours. She's inside and she's not alone." By evening, Mercer had provided photographs of Tiffany entering the apartment with a man he identified as Craig Donovan, a yacht broker who featured prominently in her recent social media posts. More importantly, he documented her bringing in several large suitcases and what appeared to be a safety deposit box. Armed with this information and the temporary conservatorship papers, I arranged for a process server to deliver 2 sets of documents to Tiffany at the secret apartment, a restraining order barring her from contact with Michael or access to their primary residence, and divorce papers citing abandonment and exploitation. Detective Rivera called the next morning. Mrs. Winters, we've executed a search warrant on the South Tampa apartment. We recovered approximately $40,000 in cash, designer items with tags still attached, and financial documents showing transfers to offshore accounts. There's more than enough here for criminal charges. For the first time in days, I felt myself breathe fully. Michael wasn't conscious yet, but he was protected. The predator who had isolated and exploited him was being held accountable. And most importantly, he was showing small but significant improvements hourly. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. The legal proceedings would be complex, the recovery lengthy, the emotional damage profound. But as I sat beside my son, watching his chest rise and fall with gradually strengthening breaths, I felt a quiet certainty that we would get through this together. 10 days after my arrival in Tampa, as I was reading aloud from one of Michael's favorite science fiction novels, I noticed his eyelids flutter. Then miraculously they opened. Disoriented blue eyes, his father's eyes, looked around in confusion before settling on my face. "Michael," I whispered, pressing the nurse call button. "It's Mom. You're in the hospital, but you're going to be okay." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by tears. Unable to speak around the ventilator tube, he weakly squeezed my hand, and I felt the first real hope since this nightmare began. Michael's return to consciousness marked the beginning of a new phase in our journey, one filled with both progress and painful realizations. The doctors removed the ventilator tube 2 days after he woke up, replacing it with supplemental oxygen delivered through a nasal cannula. His voice, when he could finally use it, was raspy and weak. "Mom," he said, the single syllable filled with confusion. "How did you get here?" Gently I explained that the hospital had called me when they couldn't reach Tiffany. I kept my explanation simple, focusing on his medical condition rather than the circumstances surrounding it. "You've been very sick, Michael. Pneumonia that turned into sepsis, and they discovered you have type 1 diabetes." His brow furrowed. "Diabetes. That's why I've been so thirsty. Tiffany said I was imagining things." At the mention of his wife, Michael tried to look around the room. "Where is she? Is she getting food or something?" This was the moment I'd been dreading, the first of many difficult conversations to come. Dr. Patel had advised me to be truthful, but measured avoiding overwhelming Michael while he was still medically fragile. "Tiffany hasn't been here. She visited briefly when you were first admitted 10 days ago, but she hasn't returned." Confusion and hurt flashed across his face. "That can't be right. She wouldn't just leave me here." Before I could respond, the door opened and Dr. Patel entered with a specialist. "Mr. Winters, good to see you awake. This is Dr. Rivera, our endocrinologist who's been managing your diabetes." The doctors explained Michael's condition in detail. The severity of the infection, the undiagnosed diabetes that had compromised his immune system, the malnutrition that had complicated his treatment. They outlined the long recovery ahead: physical therapy to rebuild wasted muscles, careful management of his newly diagnosed condition, nutritional support to regain the weight he'd lost. "You're looking at several weeks in the hospital," Dr. Patel concluded, "followed by rehabilitation. You won't be able to return to work for some time." "My job," Michael said with sudden panic. "I need to call the office." "I've spoken with your employer," I assured him. "They know you're ill. Your position is secure." This wasn't entirely accurate. I'd discovered that Tiffany had indeed submitted Michael's resignation letter through his email, but I'd subsequently met with his manager and HR director to explain the circumstances. Horrified by the situation, they had converted his unauthorized resignation into medical leave with full benefits. As the doctors left, Michael turned to me with growing awareness in his eyes. "Mom, something's wrong. Tiffany should be here. Have you called her?" I sat on the edge of his bed, taking his thin hand in mine. "Michael, there are things we need to talk about, but you need to focus on getting stronger first." "Tell me," he insisted, his voice stronger than it had been moments before. "I need to know." Choosing my words carefully, I gave him an abbreviated version of events: how I'd discovered Tiffany's absence, the evidence of her activities while he was hospitalized, the financial irregularities I'd uncovered. Michael listened in stunned silence, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally heartbreaking recognition. "The withdrawals," he murmured. I saw them, but she said she was paying for home renovations. And when I got too sick to check the accounts—" He broke off, overwhelmed. A nurse entered to check his vitals and frowned at his elevated heart rate and blood pressure. "That's enough talking for now," she said firmly, adjusting his medication. "Mr. Winters needs rest." Later that day, after Michael had slept for several hours, he woke with questions that couldn't be postponed any longer. "What did you mean about financial irregularities? How bad is it?" I showed him the documentation I'd compiled: bank statements showing the systematic emptying of their accounts, credit card statements revealing lavish purchases that had nothing to do with their home or his needs, evidence of the secret apartment maintained in her maiden name. As the reality sank in, Michael's initial defense of Tiffany crumbled. "I can't believe this," he whispered. "I trusted her completely." Over the next several days, as Michael grew stronger, more details emerged through his fragmented recollections. How Tiffany had gradually isolated him from friends and colleagues, how she'd dismissed his increasing fatigue and weight loss as stress or in his head, how she'd discouraged him from seeking medical care, insisting home remedies and rest were sufficient. "I thought she loved me," he said, the words hollow with disillusionment. "How could I have been so blind?" A psychologist specializing in trauma and exploitation began meeting with Michael daily. Dr. Landry helped him understand the patterns of manipulation he'd experienced, how Tiffany had systematically undermined his confidence, isolated him from support systems, and gaslit him about his deteriorating health. "What you experienced is a form of intimate partner abuse," Dr. Landry explained. "It's particularly insidious because it happened gradually and because men are often less likely to recognize or report such treatment." Michael struggled with overwhelming shame. "I'm an educated person. I should have seen this warning signs." "Abusers target capable, intelligent people all the time," Dr. Landry countered. "They're skilled manipulators who know exactly how to undermine their victims' perception of reality." As Michael's physical condition improved, incrementally difficult decisions loomed. Detective Rivera visited to formally interview him about the financial exploitation. The district attorney's office was preparing to file felony charges against Tiffany based on the evidence collected. "Do you want to pursue this?" I asked Michael after the detective left. "It would mean a public trial testifying about what happened." Michael was silent for a long moment. "A year ago, I had savings, a thriving career, and what I thought was a loving marriage. Now I'm hospitalized, nearly died, and discovered the person I trusted most left me to die while stealing everything I worked for." His jaw tightened with resolve. "Yes, I want to pursue charges." The decision to file for divorce was equally clear to him. "There's nothing to salvage," he said simply. Tiffany made several attempts to contact Michael after discovering he was conscious. She sent flowers with manipulative notes claiming miscommunication and professing her devotion. When these were refused, she tried to enter the hospital disguised as a food service worker, only to be recognized by security personnel who had been alerted to watch for her. Her final attempt came 3 weeks after Michael regained consciousness. Somehow obtaining a hospital volunteer badge, she made it all the way to his room during a time when I was meeting with his doctors elsewhere on the floor. A nurse later described the confrontation. Michael, still weak, but sitting up in a chair, looked up to find Tiffany standing in the doorway. Instead of the frightened reaction she might have expected, he simply reached for the call button. "Get out," he said clearly. "I never want to see you again." When security arrived minutes later, Tiffany was still standing frozen in shock, apparently unable to process that the man she had controlled so completely had found his voice and his boundaries at last. As Michael's discharge date approached, we faced another decision. He couldn't return to the Tampa condo he had shared with Tiffany, now a crime scene and the subject of asset forfeiture proceedings. His rehabilitation would require months of therapy monitoring and support. "I want to come home to Minneapolis," he said one evening, "if that's okay with you." "Of course it is," I replied, emotion catching in my throat. "I've already been looking at apartments near my place. Could I stay with you initially, just until I'm stronger?" The question, with its implicit acknowledgement of vulnerability and need, represented enormous progress. The Michael I'd found in that ICU room had been reduced to a shell, his confidence and self-trust destroyed. The Michael emerging from this ordeal was learning to ask for help, to accept support without shame. "My home is your home," I told him, "for as long as you need." 6 months after my desperate flight to Florida, I sat in the kitchen of my Minneapolis apartment watching Michael check his blood sugar before dinner. He had regained much of his lost weight, his frame filling out again with careful nutrition and regular physical therapy. The haunted look had mostly left his eyes, though I still sometimes caught him staring into middle distance, processing all that had happened. We had established a new rhythm together. Michael worked remotely part-time for his company while continuing his recovery. I had returned to volunteer work at the local hospital, using my nursing background to help others. We shared cooking duties, watched old movies together, and slowly rebuilt the easy relationship we'd had before Tiffany entered his life. The legal proceedings against Tiffany continued. She had been arrested after attempting to flee the country, charged with multiple felonies, including exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud, and grand theft. Many of the stolen assets had been recovered, though some were irretrievably gone, sold or hidden in accounts investigators couldn't trace. Michael had started therapy with a specialist in trauma recovery. Gradually, he began reconnecting with old friends, rebuilding the social networks that had been systematically dismantled during his marriage. He even joined a support group for survivors of domestic abuse, finding solidarity and understanding among others who had experienced similar betrayals. One evening, as we shared tea on my small balcony overlooking the Minneapolis skyline, Michael asked a question that caught me off guard. "How did you know Mom? What made you get on that plane when the hospital called?" I considered my answer carefully. Mother's intuition partly. But more than that, I knew something had changed in your communications. The Michael I raised would never go months without a real conversation with his mother unless something was preventing it. He nodded slowly. I was so isolated by the end, I couldn't see what was happening. She had me convinced that my concerns were exaggerations, that my illness was minor, that I was failing somehow by not pushing through it. "That's how abuse works," I said gently. "It distorts your perception until you can't trust your own experience." "I still can't believe I let it happen." "You didn't let anything happen, Michael. You were victimized by someone who systematically manipulated and exploited you. The shame belongs to her, not to you." He managed a small smile. "That's what my therapist keeps telling me." Smart therapist. As the evening deepened into night, I reflected on the journey we'd taken. The terror of that hospital call, the shock of finding my son near death, the fury at discovering Tiffany's betrayal, all of it had forged a new chapter in our relationship, one built on a deeper understanding of both our strengths and vulnerabilities. Michael would continue to heal, to rebuild his life and career, perhaps someday to trust enough to love again. I would continue to support him while respecting his independence, walking the delicate line all parents of adult children must navigate. The nightmare wasn't completely over. Court proceedings loomed ahead. Financial recovery would take time. Emotional healing would be measured in years, not months. But sitting beside my son, as the Minneapolis stars appeared above us, I felt profound gratitude for the intuition that had sent me racing to Florida that October day, and for the strength we'd both found in the aftermath of betrayal. Sometimes I realized a mother's most important job isn't in the daily care of young children, but in the moment when adult children need an advocate, a protector, a voice when their own has been silenced. That day in the ICU hadn't been about heroics, but about the simple, fierce determination that love inspires when someone we cherish is threatened. And in that determination, both Michael and I had found our way back to each other and to ourselves. Have you ever had to trust your intuition when someone you love was in trouble? Or have you experienced the subtle signs of isolation that can indicate an unhealthy relationship? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone recognize warning signs in their own life or find the courage to intervene when needed. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more true stories of family bonds and resilience, and share with anyone who might benefit from understanding that abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of gender, education, or background. Remember that reaching out for help is not weakness, but courage. And sometimes saving someone you love means taking bold action even when it feels uncomfortable. Thank you for being part of this supportive community.